everyone, I'm Joelle. Welcome to Riverway Church. We're so glad to have you joining us here online. This summer, we are pausing our live stream Sunday services until September. Thank you for your patience as we navigate this change. We invite you to join us in person on Sundays at 10 a.m. for our services at Champlain Park High School. To stay current with all of our recent messages, just visit our website or our Riverway Church YouTube channel. And to stay updated all summer long with everything happening at Riverway, the best way to connect is through the Riverway app. This app is personalized with events, messaging, and faith steps just for you. Simply search the Riverway Church app in your app store to get started. Before we share our latest talk, here are a few things coming up around Riverway for you and your family.
If you have kids who will be entering kindergarten through 5th grade this fall, we'd love for them to join us for our VBS Sports Camp July 10th through 13th. This will be happening at Oxbow Creek Elementary School each day from 9:15 to 11:45 a.m. Each day will consist of sports drills, tournament-style play-in games, and a lesson about God during our snack time. Sports will include track and field, kickball, soccer, and some fun, wacky sports as well. All week long, teams will be gathering points through sportsmanship, team spirit, excellence, and the winning team of the week will be announced and presented with prizes at church on Sunday, July 16th. This is such an amazing week, but it would not be possible without some awesome volunteers. So if you're able to help with any or all of the days, we would greatly appreciate it. Just fill out the form in the app to get signed up. So we want to thank you for your giving and for using part of the resources God has given you to make a tangible difference in our church and in our community. You can give today on our app, by texting the word GIVE to the number on your screen, or by putting your gift into one of our buckets as they're passed around at the end of service. Now, before Ryan comes out to continue our series Blind Spots, please pull up your message notes on our app, as they're a great way to follow along with the message.
We are in week 4 of this series, and we've been talking about the things that can sneak up on us in our lives, the things that we don't even realize, the things we don't see that have the potential to hurt our life. And today we're going to talk about the blind spot of burnout. The blind spot of burnout. Burnout is a real thing, and in just a minute I'm going to do a test with everybody to see if you have signs of burnout in your life. I think this is especially important when we live in a culture that demands so much from us. And it made me think of when I was a youth pastor, we played this game with our teenagers called Bigger and Better, Bigger and Better. And every single student would come together like on a Friday night, and we would give them each like a paper clip or a pen, and we'd tell them that you would have to, in a very non-creepy way, go door to door and see if you could trade the item for something bigger or better, bigger or better. And so we'd say, all right, you have 2 hours, and whoever comes back with the biggest and best thing wins the night. And I can remember that we had a couple students that came back with a giant sofa couch back to the church. And I thought, now what are we gonna do with this sofa? I don't know what to do with this thing. But there was a teenager, his name was Stephen Ortiz, in California several years ago. And someone had given him an old phone, and he wanted to see if he could barter and see if he could begin to trade his way up. And so he traded his old cell phone for a little better cell phone. He traded that for an iPod Touch, if you remember that back in the day. He traded that for actually a dirt bike. Then he traded the dirt bike for another dirt bike and traded that dirt bike for a MacBook Pro. He traded the MacBook Pro for a 20-year-old Toyota 4Runner, except he was 15 years old and he could not drive it. And so he traded that for a custom off-road golf cart that he was able to drive around. He eventually traded up for a street bike, then another car, and ended up with a vintage 1975 Ford Bronco, which he then traded for a Porsche Boxster. 2 years and 14 trades later, he went from an old cell phone to a Porsche. All the teenagers in the room, the wheels are turning. I can just see it right now. They're going, this is my ticket. This is my ticket. Forget college, forget work. I can just play bigger, better. But for many of us, when we think of that kind of bigger, better mentality, it's the story of our life. That we're constantly trading our time, our energy, our opportunities for something bigger and better. It's like the carrot is always in front of us for something bigger, something better, and it seems that we never stop. And the result for many of us is that we end up drained. We end up drained emotionally, drained physically, drained relationally, drained spiritually. In fact, some of the phrases that I hear a lot from people are, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so overscheduled, I'm so exhausted. And it seems like we live in a society that the only way to move forward is to live your life pedal to the metal, that there's no other option other than that. And this is one blind spot that we must pay attention to, because on the other end of burnout is nothing good in our life. And so this morning, this candle is going to represent our life. Hopefully your life can be lit. This candle represents our life. That eventually it's going to burn out unless something is done about it. The same is true for our life. And so here's the first fill in your notes. Let's define burnout. Burnout happens when the demands placed on you exceed the resources within you. Burnout happens when the demands placed on you exceed the resources within you. And every once in a while, we hear about the CEOs or a leader of some organization who just can't handle the stress and the pressure anymore, and they eventually burn out, and they make a bad moral decision or a terrible personal decision, right? It's because they burn out. But for most of us, we suffer from what sociologists call stress contamination, which means this, that if I were to ask you, what is the one thing that's burning you out? None of us would really be able to put our finger on it. But rather, it's a bunch of different things all combined together that are leading to this stressful contamination in our life. And we can't keep up. And really what it ends up becoming is a death by 1,000 paper cuts. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. I was shocked to learn this. The average office worker in America every day receives 121 emails and sends out 40. I mean, think about that. 120 emails that you're processing every day, 40 that you're sending out. And that's just one sliver of your life. Add into that families and finances and things breaking down and schedules and activities and kids and all of that. And we wonder why we are a culture and a society on the brink of continual burnout. C.S. Lewis once wrote about how things internally impact us. And I thought this was profound. He said, mental pain is less dramatic than physical pain, but it is more common and also more difficult to bear. The frequent attempt to conceal mental pain increases the burden. It's easier to say, my tooth is aching, than to say, my heart is broken. And he alludes to this verse in Proverbs 18:14 that says this, the human spirit can endure a sick body, but who can bear a crushed spirit? Who can bear a crushed spirit? Now, there's different degrees of crushed spirit, right? My youngest son, every time we can't stop at Dairy Queen, he gets a crushed spirit, right? I mean, but that's like on the low end of crushed spirit. But in all actuality, there are many of us that are dealing with very, very heavy things in our lives that tends to crush us. And the very meaning of these words indicates that an individual's outlook on life has become distorted. You're lacking purpose, you're lacking drive, you're lacking joy in your life, and that's what burnout does to us, and we never see it coming. It ends up being a blind spot in our life until it's taken too much from us. And what's interesting to me is that when you look at the accounts of Scripture and the people that God used, they often experienced and wrote about burnout in their own life. That they were facing this kind of pressure. This is what Moses said, right? We think of Moses like, oh, man of God, warrior. This is what he said. He said, God, I can't carry all these people by myself. The load is far too heavy. If this is how you intend to treat me, just go ahead and kill me. Do me a favor and spare me of this misery. Elijah, He said, I've had enough, Lord. Take my life, for I am no better than my ancestors who have already died. Jonah, just kill me now, Lord. I'd rather be dead than alive. Paul, he says, we are crushed and overwhelmed beyond our ability to endure, and we thought we would never live through it. In fact, we expected to die. And I think sometimes we can hear about these biblical heroes of our faith and we think, oh, they never had a care in the world, or they had it all together, or they didn't face some of the same pressures that you and I face. But it's refreshing to realize how much in common we actually really have. And they don't apologize for their burnout. They cry out to God for help. To say, God, I can't do this. I can't keep redlining my life like this anymore. I need your help to figure out a different way to live. And so if you're not sure if you're facing burnout, I want to give you a little bit of a quiz this morning. Is that okay? I'm going to give you a quiz. In fact, I'm going to give you 6 signs of burnout to see if any of these resonate with you. The first one is this, that you are emotionally numb. You are emotionally numb. You see, burnout numbs your heart. You're designed to celebrate with those who celebrate and to mourn with those who mourn. But if the demands in your life exceed the resources within you, what usually happens when you're burning out is you just feel numb. Numb towards everything in your life for an extended period of time. A second sign of burnout is that you are disproportionately emotional. Disproportionately emotional. You might be experiencing burnout if little things set you off or little things cause you to break down. Right? The dishwasher didn't get emptied and you flew off the rails. Or your kids spilled their drink and you started crying. If something is like a 1 on the problem scale and you react at an 11, could be a sign that there could be some burnout in your life. The third sign of burnout, decreased focus and awareness. Decreased focus and awareness. You see, when you're pushing towards burnout, it takes way more energy to produce less results. Way more energy for less results. You lose sight of the big picture. And because of decreased awareness, you always feel like you're on the hamster wheel, just addressing emergency after emergency, or anything that demands your attention. Your awareness is off. The fourth sign of burnout, relationship fatigue. When everybody gets on your nerves, you might be experiencing burnout. Now, don't get me wrong. There will always be some people that get on your nerves. But when everybody gets on your nerves, they may not be the problem. And maybe burnout in your life. The next sign of burnout is spiritual emptiness. See, when you feel burned out, God feels distant. And it doesn't mean that God is distant, but because you are emotionally and mentally depleted, God feels silent. God feels distant. And it causes us to become numb to his presence and the activity of God in our lives. And it's not that he's not active, but maybe we've stopped recognizing, maybe we've stopped our gratitude for what he's doing in our lives. But we can easily feel spiritually empty when you are experiencing burnout. And the last sign of burnout is this, that you practice self-medication over self-care. Self-medication over self-care. And whether you realize it was burnout or not, when it happens, the natural tendency is to self-medicate. What can I do to just get through? Right? It doesn't register in our mind, what do I need to do to get healthier or get better? But what can I do to mask what I'm experiencing to make it through? This could involve overeating, overworking, sexual indulgence, drinking, impulsive spending, or even drugs. right? When these things begin to happen, you begin to choose a path of self-medication over self-care. And if you find yourself in this spot, find a good therapist, find a good counselor that can help you in that place. Now, some of you, after going through this list, you might be kind of alarmed right now because you're going, boy, I'm 6 for 6. This is not a good situation. And I would say if you find yourself and you identify with some of these things, and you were to be honest enough with yourself to recognize that you're probably redlining in your life and there's some burnout happening, it's time to pay attention. Because if we were honest, many of us are functional burnouts. You've heard of a functional alcoholic, right? Somebody that can drink and drink but continue their daily functions. For many of us, we're functional burnouts. We're burning out in our life, but yet we just continue day to day. But I can tell you from personal experience, if you live in low-grade burnout long enough, it's gonna lead to a breakdown. It's gonna lead you to a place that you don't want to be. I'll never forget, several years ago, I got a phone call from somebody at church. It was a guy that I knew pretty well. And at first, when we got on the phone, I thought, because there was so much silence, like there was something wrong with our connection. And I must have said hello 3 or 4 times before I heard him trying to catch himself from crying. And I realized in that moment that something was serious. And over the next 15 minutes, he cried and he cried, only getting out a sentence at a time for long periods of time. And he talked about how he felt like he was at the end of his rope. That things at work were falling apart. That his marriage, there was so much conflict, so many issues, he didn't know where to begin to repair it. Felt like he was losing relationship with his kids. His finances were a mess. And he said, Ryan, I feel like I am failing in every single area of my life. And he says, what do I do? I don't even know what to do next. He was burning out. In fact, he had been burning out, and it was such a blind spot in his life that he didn't realize it till he got to the place of burnout, which just happened to my candle. Whose ideas were the fans in this room? So what do you do if you're there? What do you do if you find yourself burning out? What do you do? If you find yourself at the end of your rope? What do you do if you find yourself identifying with some of those signs that we talked about? Well, let's look at the invitation that Jesus gives to everybody in that spot. Matthew 11, 28 and 29. He says, come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you, what's that word? Rest. He says, for anybody who's redlining in their life, if you'll start with me, I'll give you rest. And I'll tell you what, rest when you've been redlining feels like an ice cold glass of water on a hot summer day. What else does Jesus say? He says, I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. He says, let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle, and you will find rest for your souls. Rest for your souls. So how can I live without this blind spot of burnout? If I'm redlining, what can I do? Well, the first thing on your notes is this, that restoration from burnout begins by telling someone that you're struggling. Who can you tell to just say, I'm redlining in my life, and I need to pay attention to some areas, because you can't go it alone. Whatever you do, if you are suspicious of burnout in your life, you can't go it alone. You cannot do it by yourself, because it will only get worse over time. All of us experience Minnesota drivers. Have you ever gotten to the point where you've been driving your car and you feel a little shake? Or you turn to the left and you can't quite turn all the way, and you turn to the right and you can't turn all the way. This happened to me back February. If you remember, we got that massive slushy snowstorm. It was like a foot of slush. And I remember driving home in that thing, and I felt like my wheel was just gonna fall off. I'm like, what is going on? And I realized that all the snow had built up underneath my tire well. And it was keeping it from functioning the way it needed to function. And I had to get in there, right? And I had to scrape out all the buildup snow. And the exact same thing happens in our life. Burnout accumulates and accumulates and accumulates and accumulates in our lives until we realize that life isn't functioning the way that it should. My marriage isn't functioning the way that it should. My relationship with my kids isn't functioning the way that it should. My relationship with God isn't functioning the way that it should. What's the issue? And if you try to go it alone, that buildup's only getting more and more. We need one another because that buildup of burnout lodges in our heart, gets lodged in our emotions, and it grows and grows in silence. So we need each other. You've got to tell someone, I'm struggling, I'm redlining, I need some help. Who can you tell that to this week? Who could you tell today after service? The next thing we need to do is your life needs to be fueled with the right things. Your life needs to be fueled with the right things. What is it that fills your tank? What is it that causes you to get up with joy in the morning? What do you look forward to that energizes you, that you want to do more of? Whatever that is, do more of that. Find a way to do more of the things that fill up your tank. So for me personally, the things that fill me up, I love music. I love the Minnesota Vikings, sports in general. Super Bowl this year, baby, let's go. I love family activities. I'm getting coughs from the Packer fans down front. Love family activities. Chipotle and Chick-fil-A fill my heart. Community and friendships. Actually, going to a movie fills my tank. Traveling, love to travel. Those things all fill my tank. Things that drain me. Negative people. Busy work. Bad drivers. Anybody else with me? Bad drivers. Anybody else? Okay, got a few, right? There are things that drain you, and we know what some of these things are. What are the things that fuel you? What are the things that drain you? Understanding that and doing more of what fuels us. Because life has a tendency of sucking all of the good out of you. That's why Ecclesiastes 10:10 says this, using a dull axe requires great strength. So, sharpen the blade. Right? Imagine trying to cut down a tree with a dull axe, and that's what we're trying to do in life. We have burnout with a dull axe, and we're just trying to get through life, and we have to do things to sharpen our axe. Next, make physical and spiritual rest a priority in your schedule. Notice I did not say make physical and spiritual rest a priority only when you're feeling burnout. No, this is a rhythm for our lives that God has invited us into. Physical and spiritual rest. Jesus built the Sabbath into his life. He said the Sabbath was a gift to us, that one day a week we're checking out of work, right? We're checking out of all the to-do things, and we're experiencing physical and spiritual rest. I mean, if anyone could have excused himself from being too busy, it would have been Jesus, right? I mean, let's be honest. Everybody wanted something from Jesus. His time, wanted a miracle, some food, healing, attention, focus, advice. I mean, they wanted it all. But as he gained popularity and Jesus' ministry expanded and his influence expanded and his responsibilities expanded, here's what we read about Jesus, Luke 5:16. But Jesus often withdrew to the wilderness for prayer. Where did he go? The wilderness. Why? Because nobody else was there. And he went to pray. And how often does it say he did this? Often. Right? Jesus didn't do it when he was feeling redlined. He did this often. It was built into his life. And what we find when people make mistakes in their life, it's not because they're evil, but most people make bad choices in their life when they're frail. Most people make bad choices when they're on the edge of burnout and they aren't making wise decisions. And so we must plan times of rest, must plan times with God. He never meant for us to live full throttle all the time. And if we don't learn how to make room for these important things in our life, we'll be filled with regret later on. The soil needs rest to produce crops. The trees lie dormant for a season before they bloom. I mean, even the world that we inhabit has worked rhythm and rest into its existence to make itself sustainable. And we must do the same. The same is true of our spiritual life. To accept this invitation from Jesus, who says when we come to him, we can find rest. And when I take time to regularly connect with Jesus in meaningful ways, I find the strength that I need to be the husband, the dad, the pastor, the friend, the employer that I was created to be. I cannot be the husband, the dad, the employer, the friend, the pastor I was created to be if my life is redlining in every area. I can't be that. And neither can you. None of us can be that when we're redlining. And in fact, as we get ready to close, the Apostle Paul wrote this to the Jesus followers in Corinth. When he says this, look at this. He says, we are pressed on every side by troubles. Have you ever been pressed on every side by troubles? But he said, we are not crushed. We are perplexed. How many of you have ever been perplexed this morning? We have been perplexed, but not driven to despair. We are hunted down, but never abandoned by God. We get knocked down, but we are not destroyed. How and why is that possible, Paul? Just a couple verses later, he tells them in verse 16, that is why we never give up. Though our bodies are dying, our spirits are being renewed every day. Our spirits are being renewed every day. Paul says, in spite of all the things that life is throwing at me, I'm able to endure it because my spirit is constantly being renewed by God. I'm constantly coming to God saying, God, I need your help. God, I need your filling in my life. God, I need to read that scripture. I need to say that prayer. I need to listen to that music. God, I need your filling in my life. So while all the things are important that we talked about, real practical things, how faithfully and consistently are you connecting with Jesus? How are you engaging into what Jesus is up to in the world? How are you attaching your heart to that passion? How often are you engaging with him and bringing all of these issues to your Father? Because our life is like this candle that's already burned out again. This candle eventually will burn down to nothing, won't it? It will eventually burn out. Unless something is added, unless more wax is added back into the candle holder, it will burn out. And the same is true of your life and my life. You cannot keep burning without filling it back up. Because eventually, your wick will have nothing left to draw from. And you will experience burnout in areas of your life that you wish you hadn't. It's a blind spot that we have to pay attention to. And so while we're feeling all kinds of different things in our lives, and maybe this morning for the first time you realize some things are redlining in your life, instead of blaming your life, instead of blaming our employer, instead of blaming our family, let's make some changes before it costs us. Let's make changes that we need so that we don't burn out. And let's ask God to help reveal that to us and have the courage to take the steps necessary to defeat burnout in our lives.